This is Reverse Engineered.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jon Penland, and Reverse Engineered is brought to you by Kinsta, a premium managed hosting provider. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Aleyda Solis, SEO consultant and founder. Aleyda, welcome to Reverse Engineered.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very
Uh,
happy to be here today.
All right. Well, to get us started, Aleyda, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Indeed, I am an SEO consultant and founder. I have a boutique SEO consultancy called Orianti, and I have been doing SEO since 2007. I worked before at agencies and then also in-house. And then it was in 2014 or so that I set my own SEO consultancy in order to provide highly personalized SEO advice and support in general to well-founded startups or established brands.
Yeah. Well, I do want to get into that transition, but before we get there, can you take us back to the beginning? How did you get started in SEO?
Yeah, I started doing SEO a little bit by chance, right? I was a web designer, front-end web developer, and my clients at that point, they typical question, right? How do I get more visits to my website? And so I started to research a little bit more about online marketing, e-commerce in general. At some point, I also even enrolled myself into a e-commerce master, thinking that I was going to learn about doing online marketing. And then I realized it was more of the development side of things. But eventually, and this was like a serendipity type of situation, right? At that same time, I ended up applying to become the website manager of many websites that were owned by an online marketing agency at that point. And one of the responsibilities was to do SEO for those sites. And of course, it was an online marketing agency and they did had a few SEOs. So I ended up learning from them how to do SEO. And I really like it because I thought that it was like the perfect match of someone with my profile who knew how to make websites, but also enjoyed the marketing side of things and how to tweak things in an organic way, let's say in a natural way, in order to grow the organic search traffic and conversions and revenue ultimately, of course.
So you were working for an agency and you found that SEO was the piece of that internet marketing responsibility that you had that you most enjoyed. At what point did you decide to transition and really specialize and strike out on your own?
Yes. So it was at one point that one of the SEOs from the SEO department was leaving, and my boss at the time, he saw that I was really keen on doing SEO and this SEO side of things of my day to day. So he offered me the position to focus completely on SEO, right? And handling clients, right? Rather
Yeah.
than our own websites, indeed.
Yeah. So when did you make the decision then to transition away from that agency and do SEO just yourself, your own
Yeah, well, I
consultancy?
had quite a few roles after that, right? I spent like 4.5 years working at that agency, and then I
Mm,
work in-house. Also, I work after that in-house role. I work at 3 different roles in-house. And then it
mm,
was like after a few roles that I realized that, yes, that I wanted hand to be able to be more in control of the type of projects that I worked on. Then also at that point, I had already started to contribute to blog,
mhm.
to speak at events, at conferences. So there were more companies reaching out to me in order to hire me. So that there were like the mix balance of things, right? Like there was this demand, and then
Mm.
I felt already ready, let's say, to and keen to look in order to be able to provide the service myself. So at that point, I realized that yes, I wanted to become independent and to establish
Yeah.
my own consultancy.
Yeah. I know one of the things that you've talked about a lot online is you're a big proponent for remote work. You know, this goes back a number of years as well. And you have Project
Yeah.
Promoters that where you specialize in that area, helping folks move in that direction in their lives. Was that at all a motivating factor for you in striking out on your own, the desire to be completely remote?
Well, I have to say something, right? Like I was lucky enough that one of those in-house roles that I had was coincidentally a remote role, right? It was like
Mm,
my second in-house role or so, or third in-house roles, right? Like, and I was living in Madrid at the time, and it was part of a completely distributed team that was spread out across Europe. And my boss was in Germany. I had another colleague in Estonia, another one was Italian. So we were all spread out. And that first experience as an employee blew my
Mm.
mind, right? I was so used to take the subway every single day to go to the office in Madrid city center, right? So the quality of my day to day and my
Yeah.
life, and it changed completely. And I felt so guilty at the beginning because, oh my God, this doesn't feel really like working. But at the end of the day, I realized that I was making things happen. I was being productive. I was being of value to the company, etc. So yes, indeed, that experience changed, let's say, my mind and made me realize that if I ever wanted any other role, or if I ever wanted to become independent, my company had to be remote, right? So
Right.
that for sure. And then, of course, realistically, this is the thing, right? Unlike many other people here in Spain, I am a native Spanish speaker, right? Like, and at some point when I started also blogging and speaking, and it's natural, right? I did it in Spanish, but
Mhm.
eventually I realized that if I did it in English, my reach was much bigger.
Mm.
And then at some point I started also speaking in English, etc. So many more international companies started to reach out to me. So this is the thing, when I started to think becoming independent, I realized it's like, realistically, if I want to establish myself as a remote based SEO consultant, that is completely feasible because most of my clients anyway will be
Right.
abroad. And until
Yeah.
today, it's true, I am still based in Spain, but yeah, 90% of my clients are from all over, right? From the US,
Yeah.
from across Europe, the UK, etc. Right?
Right. Well, I had to mention the remote piece because it's actually something internally that came up. Sam Gooch, our own SEO
Mhm.
specialist, heard about Kinsta from a tweet you had sent out because Kinsta is completely distributed as well. So, but it's interesting. It's interesting to hear. It sounds like there was really, in your mind anyway, kind of a good alignment between this concept of being remote with the fact that you recognized most of my clients are going to be not where I am anyways. So
Yeah.
why would I try to force into a prior model of having an office and worrying about those things if I'm not going to be physically present with my clients anyway?
Yeah,
I,
indeed. And it was funny because it was very natural, right? Like when that happened and I established myself as an independent, remote based SEO consultant,
mm,
then many other SEO colleagues started to ask me, oh, how do you do? But realistically, we were from home. It's like, or they saw me that I started traveling much more, right? And I use
mm,
SEO events pretty much to network and socialize because otherwise I would be at home. I started going at the beginning to co-workings, but realistically, I'm the type of person that needs to be isolated, especially when I am doing an audit or an
mm,
analysis. When I wanted to socialize, yes, I went to the co-working, but once per week, something like that, right? So this is what really pretty much incentivized Elisa and then Christian. These were two other SEO colleagues to found remoters.net, which is my free remote job board. We have a tool section, how to guides. Yeah, so there's a wealth of resources that are completely for free in order to empower people and companies to work remotely. And it was because of that, because I started, these other two colleagues started two at the same time, more or less coincidentally, nothing
mm.
connected to me. And then we realized that we were all being asked around about,
Yeah.
oh, but how do you do it? Right. And I am quite happy to see how it has taken so far since then, right?
Mm.
Because at the
Yeah.
beginning it was SEO, web development, and copywriting, VAs, things like that. But amazing. Now in Remoters, we have hundreds of new jobs being posted every month, and literally about business development, sales, human resources, anything is being hired remotely at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely true. It's been interesting to see, there are a lot of companies that have been remote for a long time. Kinsta's basically been remote from its founding. Most of the team has been remote. But I do feel like, if you looked back 5 years ago, a lot of those core business functions were in an office, and then the technical staff might be distributed just because they were having a hard time finding enough technical staff, enough developers, or things that are easy to work with freelancers on, copywriting, VAs, that sort of thing. So, I think there was a huge shift over the last 2 or 3 years to just make everything remote, right? Like we got to close the offices anyways. So all functions are now remote. And I think it opened a lot of eyes.
Try to leverage that
That's right.
opportunity at the end of the day, right? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I want to shift the conversation just a hair professionally and talk about your agency, your consultancy, Orianti. What is Orianti? How does that fit into your career in SEO?
Well, it's fantastic because it gives me the flexibility to work with those companies where there's actually a good match, right? Most
Mm.
of the companies that I work with are companies that they are already well established. They have their own in-house SEO teams many
Mhm.
times, and what they need is support for specific challenges. So, for example, they are launching a rebranding, they have certain challenges, or they are struggling in certain in sectors or countries, and they are sometimes so embedded in their day to day and the typical operations of their in-house SEO program that they need to reach out external SEO help. And of course, there's a thing I think that now in the SEO industry, we have reached this maturity that we realize that if you end up hiring the typical digital marketing agency, at the end of the day, unfortunately, you will going to be supported on a day-to-day basis by an SEO who an account manager that is not more knowledgeable than you are as an
Mm.
in-house SEO, right? So more and more bigger companies, established companies that have in-house SEOs, they go and reach out to independent SEO consultants or boutique SEO consultancies that they know they are specialized in certain type of projects, right? So for example, in my case, I'm not focused on link building, for example, but I do strategical international rebrandings, migrations analysis, or rankings drops analysis, or so this type of well-established type of projects that they know
Mhm.
that I will be a very good help on, establish roadmaps for example, doing trainings, these are the type of projects. So it's interesting because we now, I think that we are at the stage in the industry that we know more or less the different type of profiles and yeah, the different type of profiles and characteristics that you should look for to get in-depth personalized help. And this
Yeah.
is how I end up
Yeah.
supporting most of my clients. Then I have other type of clients that is like a little bit the other way around. These are high growth startups that have been funded, etc., and they want to establish finally a proper SEO program, right? That maybe they have a single digital marketer, and now all of a sudden they have all of these resources, and they need to grow 10x all of a sudden. So in these type of scenarios, I work directly sometimes even with the founders or co-founders and the marketing managers to establish literally like the framework, the base, the roadmap from scratch. And I to have a good foundations in order to scale as they need.
Yeah. I was reading about Orianti in an interview that you had done a couple of years ago. And one of the things you said in that interview is that you really enjoy doing the work. And you were speaking of doing hands-on SEO work yourself. And that's the reason why I decided to be a focused and highly experienced SEO consultancy rather than a full service marketing agency. So I think what I'm hearing based on that quote and on your answer is that you're not really interested in running an agency. You're bringing a
Mm-mm.
very high degree of expertise that you yourself are bringing to the table. Is that accurate?
Indeed, indeed. So this
Yeah.
is a thing I realized at some point, and I think that all of who have started consulting, right? At some point we reach this level of demand, right?
Mm.
And we realize of how do I scale, and there are different ways to scale and to grow at least. And in my case, it was well focusing on more sophisticated, high
Mm.
level type of clients, and of course charging more too. And then of course there are things that I can delegate and I can work with people who support my day to day, who do a little bit of the legwork, who segment, who data gatherings, analysis, etc., etc. But yes, my clients, the unique selling proposition is that they know that it is me who will answer the
Yeah.
messages. It is me who they will be meeting and talking with at a
Yeah.
day-to-day basis. And it's because I enjoy it. I
Right.
realize, and it is important that we are all
Mm.
different, right? And we all have our own, let's say, what preferences and weaknesses. And in some cases, you realize is that, oh, managing or coordinating people, high number of people, or, like running a P&L is not something that I necessarily
Hmm.
enjoy, right? To focus
Yep.
on. And I realized that many people who had gone through this journey at some point, what they did was to start hiring many other people. But when they reach, I don't know, a number of 10 people, they realize, oh, I need to be the manager now and coordinate rather than doing what I actually love to do. And
Yeah.
and then they say, okay, don't worry, because I can do this for a few years and then I will hire an operations director and whatever. And then I
Yeah.
can focus myself of evangelizing and being the face of the company, whatever. You know what? Life's too short. I'm not interested in going through that journey in order to make a little bit more than I do potentially. I do already very well. So I'm
Yeah.
happy to say like this. And then also this gives me the flexibility for these other projects like remoters too,
Right.
where there's a real mission behind that too. So yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very wise decision on your part. I've talked to, as you were speaking, I was being reminded of a designer that I talked to during season 1, Georgia Luby, who she's an extremely well qualified design, actually an illustrator primarily, but she does a lot of data-driven illustrations. And she's made a similar choice where she's like, I really specialize in this. This is what I love to do. I have the specialized body of knowledge. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in recognizing I actually enjoy being really good at my job, right? Like,
Mhm.
I don't want to manage 20 people. I don't want to create a big company. I genuinely really enjoy the work. So I'm going to niche down and really become the specialist in this area. So yeah, there's no right answer. I don't think there's no single right answer to how do you grow your business. I think you have to grow it the way that fits your preferences, your lifestyle choices, what you enjoy doing. So I think that's awesome.
100%.
Yeah. So I want to shift away from your personal story a little bit and move into the SEO field just for a few minutes here. One of the things that immediately came to mind when I saw we were going to be chatting, there's been a lot happening in the European Union especially over the last couple of years, but really just here in the last couple of months relative to GDPR, particularly relative to Google Analytics. Where do you see the SEO industry moving as there are additional rulings come out relative to Google Analytics and other analytics tools in the European Union?
So I have to say something, right? Like we suffer from Google Analytics related, let's say, measures that they took years ago,
Mm,
connected supposedly to privacy at some point. I don't know if you recall this, they're not provided. That was, no, 2011, 2012, something like that, like
mm,
very like 10 years ago or so already. And at that point in SEO, we leverage a lot Google Analytics in order to understand which were the queries, the keywords that brought the traffic and where it landed, the pages, and then all the metrics connected to traffic conversions, revenue, etc. Right? So since then, at that one point, I feel that we were the first in damage, right? Let's say, but by limiting the information that we could obtain from Google Analytics in order to facilitate our analysis because of privacy. Okay, perfect. I think that we have moved a long way. We obtain most of the query keywords data from the Google Search Console, third-party tools, SEMrush, Ahrefs, Systrix, and many others. And then we have been able, let's say, to work around and to establish a few, let's say, tactics and steps to match them with organic search traffic that we do obtain from Google Analytics and all the conversions related metrics there in order to, well, do a, let's say, at least a good enough, well-informed decisions about what is paying off and what is
yeah.
not. Even despite we cannot expect 100% accuracy, at least we have consistency.
Mm,
And that is what is also like the mix of those is what is important to do well-informed decisions. So I think that we are not necessarily very, very, very high reliant on Google Analytics from that side. Then on the other hand, as with any other role or as any other digital marketer, right? We do need to track conversions. We do need to identify what is the user journey within the websites to understand what are the preferences. It is nice always to obtain the keywords that are being tracked by internal search features, right? In order to understand
mhm.
what is not provided already by default within the navigation or as a facet or as a part of the taxonomy, right? That we may want to enable an index and leverage to obtain more organic search traffic and things like that, right? But
Mm,
I think that from that regard, we are as, let's say, negatively affected as any other
sure.
digital marketer. I have always tried to advise this since I work with a variety of type of clients. Many of the clients that I work, the very well established brands, many of them don't even rely on Google Analytics because of
Yeah.
privacy things. They
Mhm.
use Adobe Analytics. They use other solutions, right? And many of them have also a couple of systems. So we're relying completely on a single one, and also check consistency. And then for the newer, smaller startups that I advise to, what I recommend them is to have at least a couple of platforms, right? In fact, the other day when they were announcing that French
The French DPA. Yeah.
organism in charge of this did, they confirmed that yes, Google Analytics, etc., etc., was not complying with privacy standards. I share an article that you had written, that Kinsta had written about alternatives, right? And this is a good part. There are other alternatives that don't rely on cookies that will hopefully provide good options to avoid having to completely be, let's say, I don't know, having all the eggs in a single bag of Google
Yeah.
Analytics, right?
Yeah.
Of our tracking. And what I recommend as much as possible is that also, if you can, to try to export your data, to grab your data and export your data through Google Data Studio, also to do a little bit of repository of former insights, whether BigQuery or even Google Sheets, even if you don't have that much data, can even a workaround, right? But yes, avoid having all your eggs in a single bag that we
Yeah.
don't know for sure if it is going
Right.
to be there necessarily, right?
Well, and I feel like the takeaway there for folks, whether they're running a website or whether they're an SEO, it is that you can no longer keep all of your eggs in that Google Analytics basket. You need to go ahead and be thinking about alternative analytics programs where you have greater control over privacy, particularly if you have greater control over where the data is stored. And if you're an SEO, you need to go ahead and start learning to use some of these alternative tools and understanding how to correlate the analytics back with what you're doing as an SEO. So that's awesome. Okay. So I sticking in the SEO topic for a little while here longer, and thinking about maybe somebody who's new to the SEO space or somebody who runs a website. What are some of the SEO misconceptions you might point out as things that folks should be aware of?
Well, misconceptions. I really dislike this thinking that many people still today have, that, oh, I am going to SEO optimize my
Mm,
content, right? Like you
mhm,
don't optimize, or you don't do anything for SEO. You do it for your users, right? And because you want to be found
mhm.
through search by potential users and customers, right? So I highly, highly dislike that the thought of SEO is like a burden or an extra things that you need to do because of the demand of the requirement or X or Y. No, you're doing it because you literally, whether you are a developer or a UX person or a content person, very likely one of your goals is connected with the fact that the product that you're working with will be used by actual customers, that they
Right.
will pay or consume what you built or create in different ways. And we help to make that happen, right? We help
Yeah.
that match. Also, I dislike the comparison of SEO and PPC, right? Because realistically, PPC and paid search in general, like it's a cost, right? Like you're paying for clicks through third-party platforms. In this case, you are investing in your own website and content quality to follow certain type of standards that are liked by search engine to make it easily findable, right? And
Mm,
many of these best practices and guidelines are very well aligned to also user experience best
mm,
practices. We ensure that the content is descriptive, that the content is high quality, is comprehensive, that it connects with the way that the people actually search and fulfill the search intent. Um, so there is a series of best practices that are like now so not what it used to be
mm.
in the year 2000 SEO.
Yeah.
Back then, opportunity was very basic, was very fundamental. Oh, I don't know, spamming keywords within the content in order to run better for
Right.
this keyword. No, Google has at this point the capacity to understand semantically the meaning
Mm,
of the content, has had a lot of work also leveraging machine learning too. So there are a lot of, let's say, sophistication in within their algorithm that literally I believe our role is very, let's say, like it's just a layer that is blended, that is aligned across different disciplines, and
Mhm.
pretty much is to add this non-functional attribute to whatever you do, to your web product, to your web content, which is to make it findable, to make it
Yeah.
easily reachable, and to ensure that it gets the customers that it deserves, right?
Yeah.
And here the problem is that the struggle in SEO is that, of course, for that we need the alignment of and support of many different areas: web development, content. We need flexibility. We need resources. And these are areas will never depend on us, but we
Mm.
need to work with them. So excellent. Besides, of course, having really good SEO know-how, you also need to have really good communication and coordination skills. You really need to understand the product in order to identify the opportunities, how to blend initiatives that the product already has in order to make it easier for you to your own initiative that you know that will have like also the higher impact. A website will almost never be completely optimized. So you really need to go beyond a
Mm.
typical checklist of nice to have, and you really need to identify and assess what are those top things that will actually move the needle in your particular context and can be completely different than from any of from another project, even in the same sector,
Mm.
right? But if you're relying on a different tech stack and the
Sure.
resources are different too, and the flexibilities within the company and the framework that you're using is different, that it will be completely different too. So yeah, so this type of app, that is also a lot of the struggle with SEO. Is like, oh, SEO, it's difficult to understand because whenever they ask you, oh, like, how much links do we need or how much content
Right.
do you need, the answer will be always, it depends. It depends on your own analysis
Yeah.
and in your own context. And for that, you cannot have a simple answer after having taken a look at a website for 5 minutes, right? You
Yeah.
need a proper in-depth analysis and audit and prioritize recommendations or roadmap.
Yeah, I love that high level view that you just provided where you think of SEO not as a separate thing that you layer on top of everything else that's going on your website or with your business, but really as something that has to blend in with what is the product? Who are the users? How are those users trying to find you? And there is a technical element where the SEO brings that expertise to the table. How do the search engines work? How are they going to look at the markup? There is that technical element, but that technical element only is going to be as effective as possible if it's blended with these other parts of the marketing stack and the business at large.
100%. In fact, I have to say something, right? I was actually sharing a few days ago SEO. I call it the SEO success needs
Mhm.
pyramid
Yeah.
because it was something that I always love to create charts so my clients can easily visualize what I am explaining and that can be perceived as otherwise complex, right? And this was pretty much a pyramid showing how the base is to fix. We always start in SEO like trying to optimize as much as possible the base of everything to make the content accessible by search engines in the first place, right? Because if search engine cannot access the content, as many users cannot also at the same time, I'm afraid, well, they won't be able to run the content in any case, right? So there's this base of fixing and then optimizing what you already have too, aligning it already to existing initiatives and based on the goals of the business and marketing of the company, right? But then also there's this layer of building, right?
Mhm.
And unfortunately, many companies are stuck in the fix and optimize stage rather than moving to the build stage. And the
Mm.
build stage is where, based on the research and the benchmarks that we do from organic search behavior versus your competitor and in your industry, we identify new opportunities that you haven't yet targeted at all
Mm.
and can help you to inform your content team, your product team of a new functionality, of a new content section, of a new content initiative, or something that you can actually create and build from scratch that your competitors still not have, or maybe
Mm.
one of them have it and is the weakest one in the industry, so they are not really maximizing the opportunities of it, right? So,
Yeah.
and this is where you actually see the major progress, right? Unfortunately, a lot of companies still, I'm afraid, they are still stuck at the oh, SEO is to fix what is broken.
Mm.
And add this layer of, it's crawlable, it's indexable, it's rankable, but they don't have an actual strategy behind. And because this is what is built usually in this higher level, this next steps in the process when you are building, right? So you need to try to blend these different stages and different modes in order to don't get stuck as much as possible. But yeah, sadly, sometimes the way that companies see SEO is like, oh, everything that I launch is SEO optimized. Like, okay, they make
Right.
sure that is indexable. They make sure that they add the right keywords in the metadata and then also within the content, whatever. But yes, and why you did wanted
Right.
to prioritize this content in the first place? It's going to
Mm.
allow you to rank for something that you're not yet ranking at all, and you know that this type of queries connect with the commercial type of goals that you have with this type of
Mhm.
products to grow your conversions. So this type of thing, a more
Yeah.
strategical approach, right?
Right. Yeah. So recognizing the kind of that strategic role that SEO plays as a part of the larger marketing strategy or just the larger business strategy, is there ever a time where due to those other competing factors where you would tell a business now is not the right time to focus on SEO? There's some other part of your business that you really should be investing your time and energy in. When might that be the case?
So, for example, like I have had businesses come to me and say very clearly, sorry, SEO is not for you yet, in case they don't have at all content or technical resources or
Mm.
flexibility. If you don't have capacity to optimize your web structure at all, and then also to create content or optimize the content that you have, if you cannot wait for a few months to see results, but you need the results in weeks,
Yeah.
sorry, SEO is not for you, right?
Yeah.
So yes, it is critical and fundamental that there is a good understanding and an alignment, and there is a good fit and validation at the beginning of the process. Otherwise, it's the typical circumstance in which, yes, no matter what you do and how good you do your job, the execution will be bad, and the client won't be happy with
Yeah.
the outcome, and that is what matters, right? So in the past I have also, and this is the thing, it also depends a lot on the person, on the human at the end of the day, as with any professional relationship. And because this is consulting, for example, I have had in the past clients that everything was seamless, was great, the SEO strategy and roadmap was set with this in-house head of in-house SEO, and then this person moved on and changed companies. And then all of a sudden, the new person who comes has a completely different idea of what it needs to be, whatever. And for some reason, they don't trust you or they don't rely on you anymore. They don't see you as the right person to help them to develop this. And then the project, unfortunately, because of that, is not successful. It also happens because at the end of the day, there needs to be trust, there need to be reliance, there need to be like this validation that we all know what we're doing, and I will help you to build the cases and to help you to establish and validate and to make things happen. But also it's important that the other side also trusts, because many times the investments are not trivial, right? Especially because it involves all the areas. So this alignment is critical. This good understanding is fundamental, and it depends on the humans that are involved in the process. And if they change, it can change also, unfortunately. So I have been there too.
Yeah.
I'm afraid. Yes.
Yeah. So you got to have the right people in the right place, the right personal alignment. You got to have the technical resources and the general marketing capacity, content, these types of things to be able to put that stuff to use for it to make sense to invest. Even as fundamental as SEO is, if those pieces aren't in place, then you're wasting your time spinning your wheels till those pieces get in place. So as we begin to sort of wrap our conversation up, I want to move away from SEO back to you personally, just for a couple of minutes, and we'll wrap up here in just another few questions. But I wanted to ask you, I noticed on your website, you've received a number of accolades within the industry. So they've been on a number of lists of like SEO experts to follow. I saw in 2018, you were the European Search Personality of the Year. I'm curious, have you intentionally sought out those types of opportunities? Has that been sort of like an intentional part of your branding as an SEO consultant, or did those things just happen for you?
Those things just happen, right? I am actually always surprised to see, because I have my podcast myself, right? Probably Mondays is called. It's like pretty much SEO. Like I started as SEO how-tos, but now I use them as an excuse to see also other SEO friends and connect with them over the podcast and talk about different topics regarding SEOs. And I am always surprised to see how many people pitch to me to be there. And I can imagine that is the same with, well, I have also my even blog posts. You can see that I don't have guest posts, but there are always pitches for guest posts. The typical spammy one, but also some very relevant ones somehow. So yes, I guess that there are people who are actually like pretty much promoting themselves very actively. And I can see how that might be beneficial, especially when you're starting. Thankfully, in my case, it has been always very natural, right? But maybe it's because I am also very fortunate that I actually enjoy sharing a lot. I think that a key of having developed my personal branding so well and these accolades or whatever is because I enjoy sharing. Because I'm working remotely also by myself like this, and then I have this need of interact, network. I tweet a lot, I blog post a lot, I have a newsletter. I contribute with the industry for free because I honestly feel that I have given so much by it that I want to help other people to leverage it as I have to. So it has come very natural for me. I have never pitched to be in a podcast or anything like that. So it has been very natural. I have been also very lucky, of course, to have been in the right time, right place, let's say, to and profited from that, of course. And nothing against, of course, people who promote themselves. I think that to a certain point is important, especially because the market is already crowded, right? So you need to push. But in my case, they have been very natural, right? And potentially I should do it more, not necessarily as an SEO, because thankfully I'm doing very well as an SEO, but for remoters, for example.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So it's like you found your way into these opportunities or this recognition not by pushing for it, but just by sharing. It sounds like you just kind of put yourself out there in the community, shared very broadly, both, social media, your blog, those types of places, but also got involved with different groups, different opportunities like that in a voluntary capacity. And that led to these sorts of accolades. So there are kind of two ways to go about those, right? Like, maybe if you're early in your career or just trying to make a move into this area, maybe there's a place for self-promotion, but in your case, it was, there's also just a place. It feels like sort of like a organic search campaign as well, sort of, but just applied to your personal career. It's like, I'm going to build up this body of content over time. And then eventually you're recognized for what you've built there. That's interesting.
Yes, indeed. I have to say, though, for example, now that I'm thinking about it, there were like a few times that indeed, the first time that I spoke ever at an SMX, which is a well-known event in the search industry, I pitched. I remember that I pitched, like the first time that I spoke anywhere abroad, Spain, in London, I pitched. So please, if you want to get ahead and do it, pitch, of course. Thankfully, after that, for me, was like something very natural, right? They saw me doing a good job and they asked me back or they refer me to the next event. And this is a good thing, right? It compounds over time, especially at the beginning. 100%, I think is important to look for those opportunities and promote yourself. After a while, I think it will compound and you will see that the opportunities will come to you if you do a good work. In most of the cases, too, this is how I get my clients, right? This is good. The good side of things also that you are not a huge agency with 100 people that needs to have new clients every single month. It is not like that in my case, right? Since these are also ongoing processes, long time processes. I have good enough projects because of former clients even referring to new companies when they start a new companies or spread the word to refer me to their colleagues or whatever when they need someone with my type of capacity, right? And I have more than enough with that. So yes, I think that there is a blend there.
Yeah. I'm curious, as somebody who's been in the industry for a number of years now, very well connected, what advice would you give to someone who wants to make SEO their career? They're not doing SEO full time now. Maybe they're where you are, where they're managing a variety of websites and SEO is just one thing among many that they're responsible for. What advice would you give that person?
The challenge that I had at when I was starting was to get information at all because at that time there wasn't a wealth of information. Now it's the other way around. There is a wealth of information, but also of misinformation. So you need to be very careful what you rely on and what you believe. If it is too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. So I actually put together a website that is called learningseo.io, which is pretty much a website that creates like a roadmap for someone who wants to learn SEO. And I have linked to reliable resources created by SEO colleagues, the SEO community as a whole, but that are good. They're actually sharing reliable information. And you will see how there are these fundamentals that you need to know. And then there's this additional group series of topics that are handy to learn from in order to actually execute an SEO process. And then there are other areas for more, let's say, ongoing day-to-day type of issues that you will run into when doing SEO. And then areas to specialize on, if in case you want to specialize on link building or technical SEO or content optimization. That is the beauty of SEO, that there's like, it's already well developed in order to offer an opportunity for anybody, independently from whatever type of profile you have and the type of profession where that you used to do, right? So take a look at the website. I think can open your eyes and allow you to dig a little bit more. Then I will also recommend you to subscribe to SEO FOMO, which is my newsletter. It's free. I send it every week, and I highlight the top and best resources, not only news and happenings, but also resources and guides published across the SEO community. I also highlight free tools to use, free SEO tools, and SEO to follow on Twitter, and which is going to be my next recommendation, that to leverage Twitter. There is an amazing SEO Twitter community. There is a little bit of trolling, I'm afraid, from time to time. It's Twitter after all, but it's worthy. There is a wealth of connections that can be built there. I remember that I met many people who I now consider my friends that later on ended up meeting in real life at conferences and events that we have stayed connected since then. And these are people that are rely on or ask for like for validation sometimes, or I refer whenever I cannot handle a project and I need to refer someone reliable. I refer to them and vice versa, right? So there's this collaboration going on in the community. So I will highly, highly recommend someone who looks to start to and to build a community like that to go to Twitter and start following a few people there. Those, for example, who have written the resources that I list in Learning SEO. These will be great people to follow. So usually when in the author pages, they will have their Twitter profiles to start following them. And from there, they will see that they share things from other SEOs. And so they can take it from there.
Yeah. All right. Well, you listed some really great resources I want to make sure that our listeners have a chance to look at. So you mentioned your website, which is basically links to tons of quality resources about SEO. And that website, I think, was learningseo.io. Is that right?
Indeed.
Okay, so learningseo.io. And then you mentioned your newsletter, SEO FOMO. Where can our listeners go find SEO FOMO?
Yeah, you can go to seofomo.co.
Okay, seofomo.co.
Indeed.
All
As
right.
you can see, I have issues getting the .coms.
Yeah, the .coms are
of
hard
the
to
brands
get.
that I
Right.
come up with. That shouldn't restrict you, though.
Yeah, seofomo.co. And then
Indeed.
finally, you mentioned Twitter, and a great place to find good folks to follow on Twitter is to go back to that learningseo.io site, find the authors of those resources, and follow those folks on Twitter as a way to stay up to date with a variety of perspectives. So that's, I think, great advice on resources that our listeners can check out if they want to educate themselves and stay up to date in SEO. So I just have one final wrap-up question for you, Aleyda. Where's the best place you would send our listeners to learn more about you or to find out more about your consultancy services?
Yes, aleydasolis.com is my website. Then orianti.com is my consultancy website too. And then, of course, I am very active on Twitter. You can follow me at Aleyda in Twitter in case you're active.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure and get all of those into the show notes so that folks can find you on the internet. Well, thank you, Aleyda. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. It was a nice chat for sure.
Awesome. And thank you to our listeners. That's all for today's podcast. You can access the episode show notes at kinsta.com/podcast. That's KINSTA.com/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Reverse Engineered and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or the platform you're listening on right now. See you next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Reverse Engineered, the podcast on all things business and tech. Reverse Engineered is brought to you by Kinsta. Kinsta's premium WordPress hosting can speed up your website by up to 200%. And you'll get 24/7 support from our expert WordPress engineers. Let us show you the Kinsta difference at kinsta.com.